Hi everyone, it's Emily, and today I'll be talking about my top 10 favorite 3DS games. The 3DS is the system that got me back into gaming back in 2013 when a certain game came out. So I wanted to compile this list and talk about 10 of my favorite games I've played so far on this system. These last couple years I've been buying up a lot of games just to make sure that I have physical copies of all the games I really want for the system. And so I haven't gotten around to all of them yet, but these are 10 of my top favorite games that I've had a chance to play so far. Because I've already spoiled a couple of these games in my top favorite games of all time, I will be doing a few runner-ups, so I'm going to start off with those and then get into my top 10 list. So for my first runner-up, I have Pokemon X here. So Pokemon X was the first game that I picked up for the series in quite a long time. So this game was pretty special because they introduced 3D models for their mainline games. And this was also when they started introducing the Mega Evolutions and sort of followed that recipe for the games to come. So it's been a while since I picked this game up, but I just remember being pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed diving back into the world of Pokemon with this entry, and just kind of having all those nostalgic feels from my childhood come back as an adult. The other runner-up that I wanted to talk about is Kirby Triple Deluxe. And so this was actually a fairly new acquisition, and it was my first Kirby game. And because this was a fairly new pickup for me, I haven't dived into a lot of the different levels or done 100% of everything yet, but I was just pleasantly surprised by how charming this game was. I knew Kirby is a very likable franchise that is kind of cuteness overload with other cool side-scrolling platformer mechanics thrown in. So I just found this a very relaxing platformer game that I didn't find overly stressing. Alright, so moving on to the actual top 10 list. At number 10, I have Super Mario 3D Land. So this is a classic platformer that I think is deserving in anyone's collection. I find myself not actually using a lot of the 3D on most of my 3DS games, but for this one, I feel like it really enhances the experience. And I've mentioned before how I don't particularly like timed games. Usually the Mario games are pretty forgiving when it comes to time limits, and there's a lot of fun features and little hidden secrets spread out in a lot of the different levels. So I definitely think that if you had to pick one Mario game, this would be the one to get. Next up at number 9, I have The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Now I've only experienced this game on the 3DS, and it was a really interesting entry for the Legend of Zelda series, with its very dark atmosphere and just very weird moments. Now this is another game with some time limits. Thankfully the time limits were pretty forgiving for the most part, but the very ominous atmosphere and the constant reminders of time running out did make me feel pretty anxious while playing this, but despite all that, it was really worthwhile, I think, experiencing this Zelda game. From my understanding, they did change a few things to make the experience a little bit easier on people compared to the original. But overall, I think the 3DS version is a really good way to experience this game for the first time. And next up, I have Kingdom Hearts Dreamed of Distance. So prior to this game, I did play the first 2 mainline games as well as Chain of Memories on the GBA. So when I finally got around to this game, I did feel sort of right at home, and I was just really struck by how great the graphics look on the 3DS system. You do switch off playing between Sora and Riku throughout the games and the different worlds, so sometimes that mechanic did get a little bothersome, especially if you're in the middle of a boss fight. But overall, I thought this was a really fun way to revisit the Kingdom Hearts series, and while you can play this game without prior knowledge to the franchise, I think the experience would be a little bit lessened if you haven't played at least the first 2 mainline games. But this just brought back a lot of good memories for me, and the gameplay was a lot of fun. The classic kind of hack and slash button mashing that you do in a lot of the Kingdom Hearts games. Okay, now we're going to get into more of my top favorite games. The ones that I've covered so far are ones that I enjoyed, but I wouldn't really consider them top favorite games of mine. So the first up, I'm going to be talking about Fantasy Life. This is a little RPG sim that is made by Level 5, and there's just so much you could do in this game. So there are 12 different roles you could choose for your life, ranging from woodsman, miners, a cook, to mercenary soldiers. So there's a lot of different variety of options you could choose. And Level 5 is known to make very charming games, and this is no exception. From the cute graphics to the witty dialogue, there's a lot of charm in this game, and it was just a lot of fun to go out and do these little side quests as well as complete the mainline story. So you could easily get absorbed in this game. So there's a ton of content in here and a ton of replayability, especially if you want to try out every single life job. but I think this definitely does cater to those who are looking for a more casual RPG experience with some very kind of lighthearted and fun moments sprinkled throughout the way. Next up is probably my favorite simulation type game on the 3DS system, and that is Rune Factory 4. This game could be described as farming simulator meets dating sim meets action RPG. So this is another game that just incorporates a ton of different elements in a very, I think, enriching way. This was my first entry to the Rune Factory series, and I got super engrossed in this game. While the premise does follow one of those basic JRPG tropes where the main character has amnesia and somehow finds themselves kind of ruling over this magical land. The gameplay I thought was very satisfying, where you could go into dungeons and invite friends to accompany you to battle different monsters and find treasures and whatnot. This was also my first time playing a farming simulator, and I think the game does a very good job at balancing sort of where you want to lay your priorities. You can mostly fixate on the farming elements, or you can also fixate on the more of the RPG elements. So you can definitely choose which direction you would rather go. And the dating sim elements also were pretty fun. All the different bachelors or bachelorettes were pretty charming, and it was kind of fun courting them and figuring out what they like and what they don't like when I gave them items and whatnot. For my next game, I have Shin Megami Tensei Devil Survivor Overclocked. And this was my first introduction to the Shin Megami Tensei series earlier this year, and I really enjoyed the heck out of this game. I think this game did a really good job at incorporating tactical RPG elements with the classic turn-based system using monsters or pets to battle for you. I also really enjoyed the recruitment system where you have to go and bid on demons at auctions. And they had this really cool demon fusion system where you would fuse together two different demons in order to strengthen them. And kind of almost breed them together to get desirable traits. So I had a lot of fun playing around with that system. And the story for this first Devil Survivor game was very captivating. So you have this group of teenagers who somehow find themselves locked inside of Tokyo, and they have all these demons who pop out of nowhere. So together they have to figure out a way to survive all the chaos that's happening around them. So this is definitely the darkest game I have on this list at the moment, and I do plan on playing the mainline Shin Megami Tensei games as well as Strange Journey eventually. I'm currently playing the second Devil Survivor game, and I'm really enjoying it. So I have a feeling I'll enjoy the rest of the Shin Megami Tensei games once I get around to them as well. Next up, we have Fire Emblem Awakening. So this is my first introduction to the strategy RPG genre, and I was very much taken not only with this game, but the rest of the Fire Emblem games, as well as some other tactics-based RPGs that I've been able to play so far. And I do think Awakening is a really good place to start if you haven't played a Fire Emblem game before. I think they did a really good job at balancing the explanation of how things work in these sort of games without holding your hand too much. This was also the first game that they introduced casual mode, which turned off permadeath, which used to be sort of the pillar of the Fire Emblem series. But I think that's definitely a good way to appeal to more people, because I think a lot of people are usually put off by the permadeath concept. So these Fire Emblem games I think are very character driven. So there's a lot of great interactions, and the more that you play with different characters and kind of pair them together, you get to see more dialogue choices. So it does sort of veer more towards a dating sim in a way. And there are some sort of weird time paradoxes where your future children somehow leap back in time to assist you in battle. But I think that's all kind of the elements that makes this game really charming. Alright, so we're now on to my top 3 favorite 3DS games. So without further ado, number 3 is Radiant Historia Perfect Chronology. And so I am holding up the launch edition box, but this is definitely, I think, one of the best JRPGs on the 3DS system. For combat, it has this really interesting grid system where you have these push mechanics, and you have to kind of find a way to group all the different enemies together and be able to attack them in mass. And it's really a shame that there hasn't been another JRPG that brought back this turn-based system, because it's really addicting and a lot of fun. So there are a lot of great moments throughout this game and great character interactions, and sort of just build up this camaraderie with these characters you're following throughout their journey. The other unique feature about this game is it does incorporate time traveling elements in what I think is a very satisfying way. You do have the ability to jump through time and try out different scenarios, almost like a visual novel, but definitely don't let that deter you if you're not into visual novels. It approaches the different scenarios in sort of a puzzle-like way. So sometimes you have to change things from the past in order to make progress in the future. So it was really well done. Sometimes the time traveling paradoxes you see in these games can get a little confusing, but I thought they did a really good job at making it very seamless. So these last two games will probably not be too much of a surprise if you've seen my previous videos. But at number 2, I have Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia. This is probably my favorite Fire Emblem game to date. So this is a remaster of the second Fire Emblem game that was never localized here in the West. And sadly, this was released later in the 3DS life cycle. So unfortunately, I think a lot of people missed out on this game. The reason why it's my favorite Fire Emblem is because I really loved the story. We follow these two different characters that have these intertwining paths that eventually meet up towards the end. And it's just a very satisfying journey, and I really enjoyed all the characters, and I think they also streamlined the battle system, taking a lot of elements that they introduced in Awakening and Fates, but also incorporated some dungeon crawling aspects too to change things up. So alongside Awakening, Fire Emblem Echoes here I think is an excellent game, definitely one that should not be missed on the 3DS if you're into tactical RPGs in the slightest. Now finally, for my top favorite game on the 3DS system, I've mentioned this multiple times on this channel, but this is the game that got me back into gaming back in 2013, and that is Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. As a child, my favorite game was Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. So when I heard that they were making a somewhat sequel to that game, I definitely pounced on it. And from the initial minutes of booting this game up to finishing it in, I'm gonna say around 15 hours, I forget how long it took, but I just was in nostalgic heaven. One of the things I loved not only in the first game, but also this game, was switching between light and dark Hyrule and just seeing the stark contrasts of both of them, but also how they are connected and how that kind of played with some of the puzzle mechanics that all of these top-down Zelda games tend to have. And with this being my first ever 3DS game that I played, I was really into the 3D effect, especially when you're able to march Link into the walls and kind of play this top-down Zelda in a new way. I just thought it was super innovative and very refreshing take on this genre as a whole. I could go on and on gushing about this game, but alongside A Link to the Past, A Link Between Worlds is my favorite top-down Zelda title that I think everyone should own on the 3DS system. So there we have it, my top 10 3DS games so far. So I did post a recent collection update of all my 3DS games. I am, I think, close to 60 now. In my attempts of rounding off my collection, I did manage to grab a few more titles that I'll be sharing at the end of this month in my monthly pickup videos. If you haven't seen my recent 3DS collection update video, I will link it in the card and also down in the description. And of those, please let me know which of those games I should prioritize playing next. As I mentioned earlier, I have quite a few 3DS games I haven't had the chance to play yet, but I'm hoping to soon. And I'm probably going to do another one of these top 10 lists maybe next year, once I get a chance to play more of the games that I have in my collection, because I have a feeling a lot of those are very strong contenders of breaking into my top 10 list here. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, bye guys.